So anyway, green, yeah, I don't have a, it does look kind of dark. It actually is green. It's like a dark green or something on it. All right. So we are continuing in our sermon series that we've been in really for quite some time as we continue to look at the reality of Jesus being good news and really what that means. And we've been looking through the gospel according to Mark. And it's been just a fantastic, for me, just in terms of preparation, I've loved going through the Gospel of Mark and going through story by story and section by section to take a look at this beautiful story that Mark chronicles for us and puts together for us, talking with us, or sharing with us about the life and the ministry of Jesus and the things that Jesus came and taught, what he came to do, the interactions that he had with people around him. And Jesus just is full of all kinds of unique conversations, unique situations he finds himself in, and some immaculate, just some very powerful teaching that comes from his lips, not just in what he says, but the things that he does, the ways that he interacts with people. And so this morning, we're going to take a look at the topic for this morning is the way of the cross. And we're going to be in Mark chapter 8, starting at verse 34. And this is actually a section that's quite lengthy. It's going to go from Mark 8:34 to chapter 9, verse 13. And so if you brought a Bible and you want to look along where we are, you can. Or if you have a Bible app on your phone or whatever you want to do, we're actually going to spend some time here looking at this topic of the way of the cross. And to do that this morning, I'm actually going to switch things around. So I'm going to actually start by looking at Mark chapter 9, verses 1 to 13. I want to leapfrog from the Mark 8 story. I want to jump directly to Mark chapter 9, because actually I think, if I was, this is kind of funny, if I was instructing or trying to tell, hey, Mark, it might make more sense to put one story before the other so that it's easier to preach about. And I probably would say, hey, put the story in Mark 9 before the story in Mark 8, because it would help us, us English people today that speak English and live in the 21st century to better understand what Jesus is trying to talk about when he says the way of the cross. And so I want to look at Mark chapter 9 first, and then we're going to move back to the story in Mark chapter 8. So take a look with me at Mark chapter 9. The scripture is not going to be on the screen. I think I have a picture up here instead. I have a pretty picture. Okay, so this is supposed to represent Jesus on the mountain and this story of the transfiguration. Okay, so you got a beautiful sun with the brilliance, the gleaming light. I couldn't find a better. All the pictures I found about Jesus' transformation were really cheesy and lame looking. So I'm just going to go with a nice, beautiful picture. This is kind of maybe a scene in terms of what it might have been like, kind of, maybe, not really. But in participating or watching this special experience that Jesus finds himself involved in Mark chapter 9. So listen with me, starting in verse 1 of Mark chapter 9. He said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God coming with power." And then he's going to show what that means. Here's the kingdom of God coming in power before you die. And he goes right into this next episode. After 6 days, so 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and James and John with him, and he led them up to a high mountain where they were all alone. And there Jesus was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were also talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let's put up 3 shelters, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say because they were so frightened by what they were experiencing. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus gave them orders to not tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had been risen from the dead. They kept this matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. They had no idea. And they asked him, why did the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? And Jesus said, to be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything that they have wished, just as it was written about him. Now, I wanted to start with this section because it shows us some very important things about Jesus. This is a very powerful and significant moment in the ministry of Jesus. We see in this transfiguration, this exclamation point on the fact that the coming of Jesus is a coming that is demonstrated by God's kingdom coming in a special, in a unique way, and with power. Jesus is revealed as a king and as powerful, pure with bleached clothes. There's this image of perfection and beauty and like righteousness and power that is demonstrated when he's transfigured. He's glowing. His appearance changes before his disciples on this mountain. And Jesus is seen as older. What's significant here? He's interacting with Elijah and Moses, which predate Jesus by about 2,000, well, at least Moses, about 2,000 years. Elijah, not quite as long. Maybe in the 1500s. Okay? Well, actually, that's getting my math a little bit back. Anywhere. Somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 years. So when Jesus is actually present with Elijah and Moses, it's a symbol to his disciples that Jesus actually is in fellowship with these guys that have lived far beyond him, far earlier than he has, thereby showing his relationship with some of the great heroes, you could say, of the Jewish faith, thereby showing his physical age is much different than what his real true age actually is. God the Father speaks about Jesus. Remember, they're enveloped in this cloud, and God speaks from the cloud and equates, says basically, this is my son whom I love. You would do well to listen to him. So this idea of God the Father communicating that Jesus is his son is a very clear indication of Jesus' divine nature. There's a sense of like divinity, this sense of equality with God in this concept of sonship. That's different than the way we talk about sonship today or daughtership today. Back in Jesus' day, this idea of being equated to the Son of God was a very prophetic utterance that actually referred to the divine nature of God himself. Jesus, and then it says here that Jesus is to be the ultimate teacher. So God says to Jesus, listen to him. This is my son. Listen to what he says. And so he's teaching us the very words of God. Now, why is all of this important? Because this shows us that Jesus is worth following. Jesus is worthy of believing in and trusting in him. God calls us to listen and obey Jesus' teachings. And this is tremendously important given the previous section. So I wanted to set this up for us. As we look at the transfiguration, we're seeing this powerful nature of who Jesus is, what he came to do, identified with God the Father. The Father says, listen to what he says. He knows what he's talking about. I am in him. He is in me. And then we look at this passage in Mark chapter 8. Now, so I'm jumping back now to the previous section, and this will be up on the screen for you. Mark chapter 8, 34 to 38. Then, now again, this is prior to the transfiguration, he called the crowd to along with his disciples to himself, and he said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? There's one more. Good. If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. So Jesus' statement to open this section, his first statement, is really the focal point of this whole passage and really this whole message this morning. And it'll be up on the screen here for you. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. That is the main teaching that Jesus is trying to drive home. If we want to be his disciple, we must deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him. And all the statements that Jesus says after this bring clarity to this statement. If you want to say, so it's not like Jesus is giving a whole bunch of other commands. He's actually elaborating on this statement. When he says, if you want to save your life, you're going to lose it. If you lose your life for me and for my name and my sake, and you're in my good news, you will actually save your life. If you gain everything that this world has to offer and in so doing are wanting to save your life by your possessions and by the things that you accumulate in this world, what good is that since your soul is of eternal value and significant and will be lost? And so what I want to do is spend the remainder of our time unpacking this very simple and yet very profound statement. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. So let's look at this first statement, because this is such a powerful statement, and this is really a key teaching of Jesus that is so profound for all of us who call ourselves Christians. Whoever wants to be my disciple, again, just to clarify, in Jesus' mind, there is no separation from becoming a Christian and being a disciple. The two are the same. In some of our circles today in evangelical Christianity, we focus so much like God is so much more concerned just to save your soul. And then good news, you got your soul saved. And then hopefully you'll take this path of discipleship because at least your soul has been saved. Yet Jesus didn't really seem to draw that distinction. Jesus was concerned about people following him, becoming his disciples. So this idea of becoming a Christian implied that we were on this journey of becoming someone who looks and lives like Jesus in the world. There was not intended to be this dissemination between the two. To have somebody pray a prayer to become a Christian and then continue to go on living life however we want to live life. No, there's this connection point of like a surrender to Jesus implies not just a surrender of our heart, but it implies a surrender that costs us our life. Like it goes on beyond us. And so Jesus says, whoever wants to be this kind of person, whoever wants to be my disciple, and he's going to get specific on what it takes to be his follower. A follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, again, is one who is living in such a way to see the life of Jesus developed within us. That's so important. A disciple is one who is looking to see the life of Jesus developed within them in order that we might look and live and represent Jesus to the world that we live in. That is what Jesus has designed us for. That's what we are created for. And there is a cost that is associated with discipleship. You can just think about it there, right? There is a cost. If I choose to be a disciple of Jesus, that my life might reflect his life, it's going to cost me something. That cost primarily is that it's going to cost me a life that I live life for myself, doing what I want to do. I'm instead reorienting the purpose of my life towards Jesus as opposed to what I want to do for myself in order to find significance just in who I am as a person and create my own life, my own kingdom, if you will. So there's a cost associated with discipleship, just like there's a cost for an athlete that's in training or to be at the best at anything in the world. We see this happen a lot in our world today and in our society. So here's a picture of Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice is still known as probably the best NFL wide receiver to ever play the game. Jerry Rice was known as an really the most dedicated and the most hard-working football player on the field. And his statistics and his legacy show the results of his determination and his focus to perfect his craft. His teammates and his coaches I was watching some documentaries on just some snippets this week on Jerry Rice, and just, there was just this idea that the funny thing about Jerry Rice is that every single time the guy caught a pass in his whole career, he would always double tap. And that was to kind of create a mind thinking that he's always got to double tap to make sure both feet are in bounds. So every time he caught the ball, he would double tap as a way to tell his mind, I've got to make sure every time I make a catch, if I'm on the sidelines, I got to get both feet in. And people thought he was a little crazy that he did this. It's like, okay, not enough, Jerry. You don't need to do it that much. But his determination and his will, he was a disciple of football. His teacher was perfecting his craft to be the very best. And it cost him something. It cost him a lot of time. He made a lot of money, obviously, but it cost him a lot. There's a lot of other things he sacrificed in his life to become the football player that he was. Here's another picture of a well-known figure in our world today, Elon Musk, who's revolutionized like the market today in terms of like the electric vehicles. I mean, Teslas, right? So it's like, there's a whole new world that's developed because of Elon Musk in terms of what he has done with electric vehicles. And I was watching a documentary on him a while back. There was a cost associated to his discipleship and focus and his determination to be the best. He was mentioning that early in his career, he would sleep only 4 to 5 hours a night. And this is not uncommon for most big-time CEOs in our world. These men and women that are at the tops of their organizations sleep very little. And then he changed his sleeping because he wanted to maximize his time to be a dedicated disciple to perfect his craft of, you could say, of the Tesla business. And all the other stuff he's doing now too, right? With SpaceX and all kinds of stuff. So, but what I noticed what was interesting is that Elon Musk, once he realized and found out that actually better sleep would help him be more effective, he actually started to sleep longer. Because he wanted it, not because he really probably cared about his body, but because he wanted to be better at his craft, at what he did. He also works 7 days a week as a common way of operation. And in that, so there's a cost. I'm not saying, I think that's a bad idea, to be honest with you. 7 days a week, God created us for rest. But the reason I bring up someone like Elon Musk and Jerry Rice, I'm going to put pictures of all kinds of other people up on the screen here. There are so many people that have achieved a worldly success in our world today that got the best at what they did because they dedicated their life towards a certain following, a certain thing that they wanted to be about, whether it was football or, you're building your own empire, so to speak. The list could go on and on and on. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, take a look at this verse. He talks about this athletic theme. He says, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. You got 1,000 people running in a race, and only one person is going to finish first. And Paul says, be that person that runs with the dedication and the diligence to get first place. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. Paul, we could have put Paul up on the screen next to Jerry Rice and Elon Musk. Could have put a picture of Paul if we actually knew what the guy really looked like. Because Paul was dedicated to his craft as well. He was dedicated to being a committed follower of Jesus that would go and to do whatever Jesus asked him to do, even though it cost him tremendously to do so. He dedicated his life. He lived a life that was solely focused on doing God's will. And in that sense, he wants to be the best. And he also looks at us as Christians, as followers of Jesus, and he calls us to have that kind of focused attentiveness in our own development as disciples of Jesus as well. The point is that becoming a follower of Jesus is an all-encompassing thing. It is a lifestyle that should not be given the leftovers of our time. It should drive us daily. Well, I want to let that sink in for a moment. Being a disciple of Jesus is the most important thing in your life. It is what should drive our lives. It should inform all of our decisions. It should inform all of our time. It should change the way we see the world. It should change the way that we handle our schedules or how we spend our money or whatever. Everything should be driven and operating from a foundation reality that I am a dedicated or a devoted disciple of Jesus. That is my identity. That is what God has created me for. That should drive everything that I do in life. And so I want to share an application point with you that comes from this first statement that Jesus gave. Whoever wants to be my disciple, begin viewing the development of your relationship with Jesus just as important as your daily need for meals and sleep. Maybe as a practical way to think about it. Begin viewing the development of your relationship with Jesus just as important as your daily need for meals and sleep. Because that shows us how incredibly crucial it is to be developing and in this relationship with God daily. That is empowering our lives and driving our lives. Now, I want to be careful here too, because I don't want you to interpret what I just said here, that for some reason, to be a good disciple, you got to have the same sort of drive and diligence that Jerry Rice had in football, or that Elon Musk had in developing and building Tesla, and sacrifice sleep and work 7 days a week to try to gain God's approval. Or Paul, that you're actually going to have to go, get yourself beat up several times and find yourself killed for your faith. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that however we view our lives, we need to view our lives from that foundational reality that the reason it gives me meaning or get out of bed in the morning is driven by my relationship with Jesus. That is the rootedness to all the things that I do in life. It doesn't mean that there's another task list that you have to accomplish, another set of things that you have to go do. Like this, oh man, God's keeping score now. It's like I got to do this now. God may call us to do those things, but it's not a list of legalistic accomplishments. It's really an attitude of our hearts that then drives us to live different in the world, right? To see our lives different each and every day. And that will change based on the person. Okay, so I just want to encourage us in that sense. This isn't a sense to try to, there's a careful need to walk attention here about we're not trying to work hard to gain God's favor or approval here. This isn't a works-based thing. I need to do a bunch of things so that God will be happy with me. But it does involve us looking at our lives and to say, God has created me to see that this is what's most important about me. And that my relationship with him drives everything that I do. And friends, if that seems overwhelming, it is overwhelming. And it is a lifelong task. I'm right with you on this, right? It's a journey with God that takes us with him each and every day. And we learn new things. But our rootedness, as David says, create in me a clean heart, O God. There's this heart of dedication and focus that I want to be completely devoted to you. Okay? So that's Jesus' first statement in this passage. Whoever wants to be my disciple. And then he says, must deny themselves. Must deny themselves. Now this can be a complicated statement to understand. This doesn't mean that we don't take care of ourselves. There are some branches in Christian thinking that when they see this, it was like they would go into extreme asceticism, and it would be like, I deprive myself from certain things because the body doesn't mean anything, it's useless, it's pointless. That is just not true. God gave us our physical bodies that we are called to steward and to care for. And so we are to rest We are to sleep. We are to eat and to feed ourselves and to exercise as best that we can and to care for, to best steward the body that God has given to us. We're not to look at it and say it's not important. It's not necessary. It is important. And it is necessary for our physical life that we currently are living. So what does he mean then when Jesus says that we must deny ourselves? Remember what I said last week about the inertia and the gravity of our human nature that naturally pulls us into self-centeredness and pulls us into comfort and safety and control and self-preservation? We talked about this last week. We are called to combat that. We are called to be aware of our nature and our propensity to choose what seems right to myself, which is more comfortable for myself, that is more based on my own self-preservation. That is a natural inertia, a gravitational pull that will continue to pull at us our entire lives. And denying ourselves is a simple way of learning to combat that nature and that urge. So consider, for an example, an athlete that's in training. If an athlete does not follow through on their workouts and on their conditioning, as hard as those workouts and all that conditioning gets and is for them, and as much as they say, you know what, I've worked a half a day, I'm done. I can't do anymore. If they throw in the towel and they want to throw in the towel for the day, they are not going to get to the level that they want to be as a professional athlete. Look at this second point here of application. We can pay attention to the things that we're normally drawn towards, even good things, and intentionally fast from them in order to devote time to what Jesus might want to cultivate in us. So when we talk about denying ourselves, this is an example of what it would look like to deny ourselves. Okay? And we're not saying that we hate ourselves, that we hate our bodies, that we're not supposed to take care of ourselves. Again, we can pay attention to the things that we're normally drawn towards, even good things, and intentionally fast from them. Remember, fasting doesn't just have to relate to food. It can be just a willful decision to do without for a period of time in order to devote time to what Jesus might want to cultivate in us. Let me give you an example. You may have a routine at night to watch television or to read. You might, that may be a natural, everybody's got a different routine in the evenings. You get to the end of your day, some may just want to pop open a book, some may just open their computer and watch something on their computer. You may turn on the television, you may listen to music. I don't know, whatever your routine is. And those routines are not necessarily bad things. I mean, those are ways that maybe we unwind or we kind of get ready get ready to go to bed eventually at some point in the evening. But as a simple example, you might consider a couple of nights a week forgoing TV or reading for an hour. I mean, again, I'm not saying, get rid of it entirely. Maybe you watch 2 hours of TV at night. Okay, well, maybe twice a week you forego 1 hour of TV on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example. And instead, use that time to cultivate your relationship with Jesus in that place. You see what I'm saying? It's a matter of being intentional. That we say, this is a way that I'm going to say, I'm naturally wired to do this, but I'm going to actually intentionally take some time and pull away from that and give myself to some time with Jesus in its place. Actually, that's what fasting actually is, right? It's a time to devote and dedicate our attention to Jesus in the place of something else that we would normally do or want to do during that time. And so this is a way in which we learn to deny ourselves. Okay, again, it's not a situation that we hate ourselves, that we hate our body, that everything. God looks at us and says, boy, everything you do very little things spiritual in your life. You go to church on Sunday and maybe you pray, a couple of times a day and that's it. It's like, well, man, you're not doing very well. God sees all of our lives as spiritual. Everything that we do can be oriented in a way that is giving glory to God with the way that we live our lives. Romans chapter 12, right? We're called to have our lives be a living sacrifice, an act of worship to God, not just what we do on occasion. So there's this idea that God is calling us to live lives that are devoted to him, that find ways to give our attention and our energy and our focus to developing our soul in and through even the activities that we do. So these are some ways that we can deny ourselves. And so it's up to us to think about that. What are some small ways? You may think about it this week. There's a small way that I may say no to something that I'd like to do or that's natural for me to do, and instead I'm going to replace it with reading and reflecting on a couple of Psalms during that time. Right? As a way to say, no, my heart, my desire really is for God's life to be developed in me. I really do want that. Well, sometimes, like an athlete, I may have to pull away from doing what is comfortable and easy for me and actually engage in something that's a little bit more difficult in order to see that developed in my life. I hope that makes sense. The third thing that Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross. Now for Jesus, the cross was a very specific command by God given to Jesus, wasn't it? Jesus actually was called by God to sacrifice his life on behalf of the sins of the world. That's a pretty heavy-duty command. How'd you like to get that command from God? You wake up tomorrow morning and it's like, hey, by the way, I want you to go die for the sins of the world tomorrow. You know, and an excruciating death and ostracized from your people and all of these things. So for Jesus, the cross would be a specific command of God, resulting in a specific obedient action of Jesus. Now remember, it's interesting here. Jesus gives this command. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross. And then he'll say, and follow me. But they don't know what he's talking about, because up until that point, Jesus hasn't taken up a cross. Jesus is still speaking. This is prior to the crucifixion, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. So this idea of taking up my cross, what are you talking about, right? They're not privy to what we know now. You know, thousands of years later, looking back and saying, wow, yeah, that cross was a pretty big deal for Jesus. But he's giving this command now, or at that time, which is prior to his crucifixion. Jesus knows that this cross that he will carry is going to be a symbol of brokenness and pain. It's also going to be a means for God's grace to be dispensed to the world. And so what does it mean when Jesus, this is the million-dollar question here, take up your cross? What does it mean when Jesus tells his disciples, and by default tells us today, to take up our crosses? What does that mean? Well, we might simply just say that what Jesus means is that we are to learn to die to ourselves and follow him. That's a nice, simple answer, but it needs some more clarification. What does it mean to die to myself and to follow Jesus, to take up my cross? How does that manifest itself in my life? I would say that we learn to give ourselves over to obeying God and doing what he's called us to do with our lives, as it was for Jesus, because that's really what the cross was, right? Jesus took up his cross. He carried it up through the streets of Jerusalem, and he carried it up the hill outside the city, and he was crucified on that cross. He did that directly due to the command of his Father to do so. So his Father had given Jesus a mission. He had given him a command, and Jesus obediently followed through with God's will, God's desire for him. And so we can give ourselves over to obeying God and doing what he's called us to do and how we are to live our lives. That's in many ways how we take up our cross, is by the obedient following of God in our lives. And what do we know that God has called us to do? 98% of the answer of this is solved when we explore that famous four-letter word that starts with an L and ends with an E and has an O and a V in the middle. Love, love. So Jesus makes it very clear of the most important way that we demonstrate and we live as obedient disciples of Jesus is we become people of love. We become people who love God with all that we are, right? That we dedicate our heart and our lives to God. We live for Him. We learn to obey what He tells us to do. That is a loving relationship, which manifests itself in how we love others and how we care for other people. So this isn't rocket science. It's not like when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me. It's not like we have to scratch our head and say, well, what is my cross? Is there a unique thing that He's called me to do that is my cross to carry? As Jesus carried His cross, the burden that He carried, this is what I'm called to carry. Well, yeah, there may be some things that God reveals to you, but I can tell you that the majority of what that cross looks like and your carrying of it is your ability and your desire to be the kind of people that Jesus has already told us to be people that love God with all that we are, with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to be people that are great lovers of extravagant grace and love and mercy to those around us. And that, as we've said before, that will keep us busy our whole lives. Amen. To be people who are learning to love. And so, we know that He's called us to love Him. He's called us to love others. But there also might be, as I mentioned, some specific ways that God calls us. Now, God's called me to love Him and to love others. That's a baseline for my life. Do I always get it right? No. I mess that up royally, just like you and I. We all do. We don't get this right perfectly. Thanks for the grace of God that helps us in our weaknesses, right? But there's also ways in which God has created me to do additional things for the sake of His kingdom. He's called me in many ways to what I'm doing here now as a vocation. I serve as a pastor in a vocational role. It's my job, so to speak, because there's a sense of God's call on my life that goes beyond just loving God with all that I am and loving others as myself. But God has also said, Darren, I want you to do this as well. I'm calling you to this as well. And I think that calling as well, not for being a pastor, so to speak, but God has a distinct calling or a distinct desire for you to join with Him and to partner with Him in the advancement and the embodiment of His kingdom in this world as well. It's not just reserved to people that get paid to tell you to do so, right? It's not just for pastors or paid pastors or missionaries or people that are vocational, spiritual folks. That God has called all of us to engage and to be a part of His kingdom. And so I want to encourage you to think about, is there a specific path of obedience that God has called you to do, or a thing to do for His kingdom? Do you know what that is? Are you willing to explore it? Look at this third point. We need to give time to listen and obey in the specific ways that God is calling us to live obediently and proactively as a kingdom disciple. We need to give time to listen and obey in the specific ways that God is calling us to live obediently and proactively as a kingdom disciple. Yes, we are to love God with all that we are. Yes, we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. That is to undergird everything that we do. But God has also created us as unique people. Every person I look at in this room is unique and different. We're all different. Nobody is the same. We have different strengths. We have different weaknesses. We have different personalities. We have different things that make us excited to do. I'm enjoying some of the great benefit of Linda's jams. I mean, they taste great on my palate. I mean, I love eating the jams that she got me. And she enjoys doing that. That's a way in which she, that's something that she enjoys. I wouldn't know what to do with making jam. I'd probably burn the house down. Okay? But God has created us as unique people. And in that uniqueness, He's not surprised by us. He actually created us in those ways. And so I think for every follower of Jesus, there's a sense of awareness. No matter how old we are. It doesn't matter how old you are. I'm 51. There are other people here in this room that are in their 80s, right? I don't think anybody's here in 90 yet.
90, not yet.
Not yet. He ain't 90 yet. Jay, how old are you?
89.
89. See, I told you, I was right. In the 80s. Okay? Doesn't matter the age, right? God has called all of us and has equipped all of us to love Him, to love others, and to be a part of His kingdom in some specific and unique ways. What does that look like? I was sharing with our board a couple weeks ago. We're going to talk more about this when we meet again next week, but there's this sense of like, what does it look like for us as a church to help create an environment that helps each of us understand some of the unique ways that God has wired us, and that may want to use those gifts or abilities to be about His kingdom in some specific ways. How do we help explore that with people and support people in that discovery in a way that makes sense, right? And it's not me telling you, which is what a lot of churches kind of do. They'll say, well, we have a need in children's ministry, or we need people to do ushering, or we need somebody to take care of the grounds, or we need to do all the... So volunteer. You're like, I hate doing all that stuff, but I guess I got to do one of them, right? Instead, it's a matter of looking at how God has made you. What brings you life? What do you enjoy? What are things that you naturally gravitate towards when you are given free time? And looking at those things and being able to say, how can those things that we already enjoy doing, that are unique to me, how can they be utilized in such a way to make an impact in the lives of other people? I'm currently exploring right now, just so you know, and this is probably news to our board because I haven't met with our board in a couple of weeks, but I'm currently in discussion right now with a ministry to student athletes at San Jose State University. That in terms of looking for, because I have a heart and a passion for spiritual formation and discipleship. And I often have wished that when I was in college that I would have had somebody who would have brought me down this path and help expose me to this pathway of formation and development, instead of me just trying to figure it out on my own, or to kind of hope that maybe just going to church and listening to a guy preach is going to help fix everything that way. But there's just this sense of like wanting to give attention and focus in that deeper level of development. So I have a friend of mine that's involved in a ministry to the athletes at San Jose State and Santa Clara University, and I'm just kind of talking with him. What would it look like for me to I have these different segments in my life, but here's an area where God has really wired me and given me a drive and a desire for something like this. And so what can I do to volunteer some of my time over here? And to be able to give myself to these students. How does that support your ministry, right? And so I'm currently exploring this as well, right? And this is outside of my job, so to speak. It's a way to say, no, God's wired me in a way. I want to explore that. And so for all of us, like there's things that God may be leading us to explore or to experiment with or to try that are focused in a more intentional way in terms of God's calling on our lives. And so anyway, we're giving time to listen and obey to these specific ways that God may be communicating to us. And we want to try to help as a church, help one another to explore that with each other and to give you an opportunity to think about those things. And they don't have to be big deal, like huge things, but even just small ways of being able to engage some of those activities as well. The last one, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. The good thing here with this, when we talk about following Jesus, there's this implication of not just following him on his footsteps, on his heels, right? But there's an implication that following Jesus means that we look to Jesus with an eye toward replication. So when we follow, it means that we're watching and we're learning and we're demonstrating and we are putting into practice what we watch. Okay, that's implied in this concept of follow. So that's a very true statement, but we've talked a lot about that in terms of like when you want to be my disciple, that's what a disciple does. But I want to just emphasize for a moment here as we close, when Jesus says, follow me, we need to realize that Jesus has not left us alone to figure this stuff out. Jesus didn't just give us these commands and say, hey, you tell me and say, hey, Darren, now go figure it out. Work hard, do your best, study like crazy, pray a lot, talk to other people, and God be with you, my son. Do your best. But no, Jesus actually promises to be with us and to guide us and to walk with us. And to be, I love this picture. There's this sense of like, Jesus is on the journey with you. He's not divorced from your experience. He's not gone from your life. He is not sitting up in heaven on some royal throne somewhere, looking down on you and saying, oh, I wonder what you're dealing with today. Or, why can't you do better at this? Or whatever, right? Jesus is intimately connected with us, every detail of our lives, each and every day. He's walking with us. Remember I've said before, Jesus is closer to you than the next breath you will breathe. He's that close. He's that present in your current experience. And so he is actually, when he calls us, he doesn't just call us to tell us to go do stuff and then sit back and watch. He actually calls us and then he leads the way. He walks before us. He makes a pathway before us. He says, stay close to me. Watch me. But Jesus, that looks like what you don't see here is kind of a picture of you to pan back and look at like this, maybe this massive, desert sand dunes that go on for miles and miles and miles. And it's like, the goal is to get from point A to point B. You can't see point B. It's way beyond your line of sight, over hills and hills and hills. And Jesus says, don't focus so much on what you can't do or not getting to that destination. Follow me as we take the next step. Just walk with me as we go on this journey together. And so the fourth thing that I want to close on this morning, fourth application point is, will we follow Jesus to where he is leading us? And will we believe and trust that as we follow him, we will be going in the right direction with our lives? Will we follow Jesus to where he is leading us? And will we believe and trust that as we follow him, we're going in the right direction? So much of our journey with Jesus is not necessarily about where we end up, but it's the journey that we're on. It's following him the next step. It's cultivating that abiding relationship that continues on and on and on and on. And then one day we wake up and we look back and we go, oh my goodness, look at where I am now. How did I get here? How did this happen? Jesus has led that direction for us. Okay? Whoever wants to be my disciple, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. That is a good message. It is a good news message directly from Jesus. Jesus, we thank you and we praise you for this day. We ask that you would continue to lead us and to guide us. Thank you for your words of life and hope and healing. We ask that you continue to be our leader, the one that we follow each and every day. Would you help us to pay attention to the ways in which you're communicating to us, to our spirits, the things that you're calling us to do that maybe just that go beyond the basics of loving you and loving others, which are so challenging and so hard as it is. But how you are calling us to pay attention to you for other things, specific things that you might be pointing us to do as well. Behaviors or ways of operation in this world to make your kingdom known. So would you keep us open and moldable by you for what you want to do in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So what we want to, let's go ahead and show that we're going to be, today we're going to be taking a Thanksgiving offering today. And it's, our Thanksgiving offering is directed towards our global missions. And there's a video here that we just want to show you that relates to that. And after it's shown, we'll get up and say a couple things.
Father, send me. This is the prayer that the Church of the Nazarene has prayed from the very beginning as she sent her people into the world, a world that desperately needs Christ's transformational love. Today, we are part of a global movement in which God is actively redeeming His creation, restoring the broken through His beautiful gift of salvation offered to all. We have been called to partner with Him in this movement. This is why Nazarene Missions exists, to share His love, compassion, and peace as we start new Nazarene churches around the world. Entire communities are being transformed through the partnerships and relationships